Welcome to this edition of Novel Ideas. Today's guest is an author based in Moira. He's written, well, he's in the process of writing many more, but he has published 10 books so far. My guest is called Tim Hodkinson. Tim, you're very, very welcome to this edition of Novel Ideas and to NVTV. I was recommended your writings by an author called Michael Redpath. Got into your Viking series, which I loved, and then I thought, let's have a look at the early stuff. And frankly, Tim, I have to tell you, really good, really, really enjoyed it. So what was it that gave you the inspiration to get involved in historical books and writing?
Well, I grew up in Lisburn, but in terms of I've always been quite fascinated by history, in a really obscure way. I like things which are not sort of the mainstream that you would do. Like I remember, like my brother taking me to Dunnet, Mott and Bailey and places like that, which are all around the little area. And but then, like, I got on a holiday once to the Isle of Man. I was probably about P7, 11, and there was a longship in the harbour, a Viking longship that they'd reconstructed and sailed from Norway, and all these people were sort of dressed up in the thing. And I remember, like, I think that was just the start of my fascination with the Vikings and the Norse, and then just from that I went on. I studied English at Queen's, and I had the chance to study Old Norse. And then I got into sort of reading their sagas and things like that, and it all grew. It's just been sort of a lifelong fascination with history. But I love one of the things I love about history is it's often not the way you expect it to be, and then that's where stories come from, I guess.
I mean, I was reading your bio, and I was fascinated with the fact that you had studied Old Norse, you'd studied medieval European history, and medieval English. Why did you study those? They're very obscure.
I guess I did a year of Celtic civilization as well, which was I think it was like a lifelong quest to be unemployable. The Old Norse also came from, like, I loved Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and things like that. And when you're in sixth year, that was okay, but then you start to go, oh, that's all made up. But whenever you discover there was a culture and writing and medieval writings, like the medieval writings around King Arthur and things like that, King Arthur's death, all that sort of stuff, Mort Arthur, they're actually more exciting than the fantasy stuff. Well, for me anyway, for sort of history nerds like me, I guess that sort of really, really sparked my imagination and interest then.
I suppose going back to those times, the fiction, if you like, the myth, the legend, was oral, and the factual stuff was written.
That's right.
Yeah.
The thing about, I mean, that's a very good point, because if you think about how those stories had to be told, you were sitting in front of an audience who would throw their. There's actually a brilliant there's a brilliant story of an Old Norse, they call them skalds. There's a poet who, like, would have to entertain the feasting hall after dinner, and they called him the bone catcher because everybody would finish their things and it was so bad that they threw the bones at him and stuff like that. So you really had to catch the audience and entertain them. So it's a different way of telling stories, I guess.
And skalds occur in your books and are revered in your books.
Yeah, the main character is kind of a wannabe skald. He has a bit of a talent, but needs to work at it.
And in the meantime, of course, he discovers that he's quite good with an axe and a sword.
He is, yeah. I mean, it's not. There's a lot of. He's got a bad temper, which makes him good at fighting, I guess. And in those days, I guess it was a bit of a more rough and ready world. So you had to do a bit of both. But I mean, the first book was called Odin's Game, and a lot of people are familiar with the Norse god Odin. They had different, heathen gods, and Odin was one of them. The Wednesday is named after him, but he was the god of poetry and berserkers.
Wow.
So
Why?
yeah,
It's weird.
It is weird, but whenever you get into it, it's really about altered states of consciousness. So the creative flow or whatever of a poet, whenever athletes talk about being in the zone, where they just know that the next pass, catch, whatever will happen, it's an altered state of mind somehow. I mean, today you can explain it all with how the brain works, neurology and stuff like that. But obviously somebody in those days worked out that there was some connection between these altered states of mind. And Odin, there's theories that the name itself means like the breath or the possessor or something like that. So they thought, whenever you're inspired, you're being possessed by Odin, or whenever you're losing your temper and fighting someone. I definitely think there's probably a talk in it sometimes about where does creativity come from, that sort of thing.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, we're exploring the creative side, we're exploring the possibility side, and the thing that is currently grabbing my attention is the fact that we've described you as, or you've told us you were brought up in Lisburn, and you moved all the way to Moira, and it sounds like that's all you've done, but you've done loads more. Well, you lived in America, you lived in New Hampshire. Yeah. How did that happen?
So I'm also a computer scientist, and I was working for a company in Belfast. There's a lot of companies in Belfast that have American headquarters, and I got the chance to go and work at headquarters. So we moved to New Hampshire for a few years. And it was a really nice part of the world, I have to say.
Okay, and you snuck the we in without letting us know. You didn't telegraph that. So who was we?
Well, we was my wife Trudy and my 3 children, Emily, Clara and Alice, 3 girls.
And as a family, how did you find New Hampshire?
It was fantastic. And I was, as a person who's always been interested in history, people think America's all new, but we lived in a town called Newcastle, which was founded in 1623. Wow. And there were houses there from that time. And it was beside Portsmouth. And on the way up, you passed Newry, Hillsborough. Actually, you passed both Derry and Londonderry, 2 towns which are only about 4 miles apart.
So you felt right at home in New Hampshire?
Felt very at home, yes. Okay. There was a couple of old revolutionary forts on the island we lived on, and it's just a very family-oriented place, very nice part of the world. It's just up the road from Boston.
Over the course of the past 12 years or so, you've published 10 books. You're working on at least one more even as we talk, probably more. But we've left you, or we picked up with you telling us you were computer-based, you were in computer technology of some description, but now you're an author. How long did you wish to be an author before you started writing?
Probably all my life. I was at school. Do you remember you used to get? Well, I don't know if they do it now. There was a composition where you had to write a story, and that was the height of my week. I always did that, and then throughout my time at Queen's, etc., I always had that sort of, I'd like to be a writer, and that sort of drifted on for years, which I think it's the one learning. I remember I met Bernard Cornwell once, and he's a historical fiction author. And I asked him advice, like, how do you get into writing historical fiction? He said, write historical fiction. So I turned 40 eventually and went, it's time to actually take this seriously and do something. And I had the Lions of Grail had been sitting about unfinished for probably 20 years. Right. And I basically sat down and I finished it.
Right.
And that's essentially how I then took it seriously. You have to take it seriously and believe that you can do it, even though no one else does.
We'll get into Lions of the Grail in a minute, but that was the first one that was published?
I self-published that.
Okay.
And then I, in true style, instead of concentrating on that, I then went and did another totally different genre book. And then, as I said, finally did the Viking one. And the Viking one was picked up by, they were originally called Ares Publishing, but they were an imprint of Head of Zeus.
Okay. And
they've now been bought by Bloomsbury.
Okay.
So they actually, I couldn't believe it. It's one of those things where you expect, well, you never expect to it's get it published is a long, demoralizing process, which maybe you're aware of, or what. But I'm sure a lot of people tell you this. But whenever I got the phone call from them, they said, "Would you write 5 books, not 1?" And I was just totally blown away by this. But it's like, you know, it's the classic: be careful what you wish for, because you've like 20 years to write your first book, and you write it and you rewrite it and it's perfect, and you love the process, and then they go, "That's brilliant, really loved it. Can I have something exactly the same next year?"
But in the meantime, your publisher phoned you up, said, "I see that your first published book, self-published, is about the Templar period. We're interested in that. Can you give us more on that?" Talk us through the process from there, because that's not really how you saw the books when you started.
No, the books were actually about, they're set in the Scottish invasion of Ireland in 1315, which I was always interested in because it was described to me by one publisher as an obscure Irish war where everyone seems to be on the wrong side, and that was what it was really about. And the main character, Richard Savage, he was just a Templar as part of the backstory. Now there's nods towards Arthurian literature and the Holy Grail and stuff within it. There is actually a subtext, which if anyone is familiar with the legend of the Holy Grail, they could pick out. There was one person actually said to me, they spotted a character and went, "Is that the Fisher King?" And I was like, "Yes, you're the only person who's ever noticed that." But it was primarily a medieval adventure story set in Ireland. But they, as I said, the marketing department wanted Templars, and if they want to put they want to put a Templar cross on the front of the book, so I had to go back and add in a whole sort of backstory, I guess. Yeah. It's not that it was cannibalized; I just added in.
I mean,
fleshed out the character a bit.
The part at the start of the book where the hero ends up in prison and does a long time in prison, and you're going, "God, how's he ever going to get out of this?" It's actually fabulous. You know, it's really, really interesting. I mean, I've told you before, a big admission, I don't read Templar books, but I have read and enjoyed this one and the sequel, and frankly, I want to see the next one. Where is it? Write it.
The other ones I have written, actually.
Good.
I don't know if it'll get published or not. The at the minute, the Vikings are popular. So Head of Zeus or Bloomsbury or whatever they're called now, they're right in the middle of this transition. They're basically, can we have another Viking book? Can we have another Viking?
We'll get back to the Vikings in a minute. We will, I promise. But I want to talk a little bit about one of my favourite all-time female characters created by you, and she's Alice de Logan, and she is amazing. I mean, do you know the richness of that character in terms of what she went through while Richard was away?
Yeah.
We don't want to give away too many of the plot lines, but the fact that she was felt by many to be a witch and therefore feared and shunned, but it was her way of helping people. Amazing stuff. Where did Alice de Logan come from?
I guess she's probably an amalgamation of some strong female people that I know.
That was really what I was getting at, because she's an incredibly strong person,
Yeah.
determined, not going to be put down easily and not going to despair easily. She's not going to give up.
No. Well, if you think about what happened to her, she was kind of left on her own, pregnant, and then married an abusive husband, which was kind of, well, those things happened in those days. But there are plenty of women who managed to survive and get through it. But you have to be tough.
Yeah. And the lovely aside in that is that women didn't have property rights in those days. So, you know, she had to make sure that she got her home before her husband conveniently departed, you know.
Yes. And did he trip or did he fall?
Whoa, there's a thought. You know?
Actually in the third book, her castle, if you like, which is it's in Lorne. Yeah. The Logan's what's left of it. Yeah. Is kind of one of the plot points.
I've always been fascinated by Robert the Bruce.
Oh right, yeah.
Hadn't realised that Edward was an extreme difficulty for Robert, which is why Robert encouraged him to go away and take over Ireland, because he didn't want him trying to take over Scotland. No. Lovely stuff.
It's a war a lot of people don't know about as well, and it was quite brutal. And the crazy thing is that it happened during one of the worst famines in European history, and they continued fighting through it. But it shows you the depths of the sort of the how everyone felt, I guess.
And they continued to lay siege to Carrickfergus Castle.
That's right.
In the midst of starvation. So the folk inside were starving, the folk outside were starving.
We're starving too.
Horrendous.
Well, I guess there is one thing though. If you're in a medieval context, the one way to make sure you did have food was to be part of some marauding army, because you just took it at the and that's how you survived.
So we've talked a little bit about the Grail, the Templar series, which was one of the first books you wrote. We haven't yet touched on the Spear of Crom, which was another series that was a first book for you. And the only reason I'm asking about it is I like the ideas in it, basically about the time towards the end of the Roman occupation of Britain, and I wondered if there were any more of those in the pipeline.
Again, there could be. It depends on. It depends very much on what people want. I mean, Spear of Crom's doing all right. It's actually I had an idea for a story with the same character when he was retired, working as like a kind of a detective in Rome. Okay. You know, it was like the a hard-boiled detective novel set in Rome, like the Maltese Falcon or something like that, except in his times.
And again, with the strong woman character, his
his
antithesis
is
a Pict, is a Druidess,
yes,
perhaps.
Yes, a Druid, yeah.
And again, what an amazing character, and you wouldn't want to be the wrong end of an arrow with her, So there must be some strong women in your life.
Well, I live in a house where I'm the only man.
Okay.
Apart from the dog.
Okay.
There's me and the dog. So I don't know, maybe that's influence on my writing.
Okay, and the third strong woman that you write about, and again, one of my all-time favourites, is the Irish Princess Afrika.
Oh, yes.
Who occurs frequently in the Viking series. Absolutely amazing. We'll maybe touch on her again. When you wrote the first book in the Whale Road series, so we meet Einar Unson, Einar Thorfinnsson.
Yeah.
He's the guy with the bad temper, the guy who wants to be a skald, he wants to be a poet, but he wants to take up the axe and the sword and hack bits off people. An amazing series. You start in Iceland, you go to Orkney, you travel down the east coast of the British Isles. Amazing stuff. Where did that come from?
The great thing about historical fiction, it's set in an actual time whenever, you don't have to... The events actually happened, so you can actually go and research historic events. The Einar himself, his mother's Irish, but she got kidnapped by the wicked Earl of Orkney, who's an actual Thorfinn the Skull Splitter. He was
Skull Splitter, yeah.
He was a historical figure, believe it or not. Yeah. So where did it come from? I mean, there's numerous Icelandic sagas about young lads from Iceland going out to find themselves. I honestly don't know where inspiration comes from. And sometimes it just flows, you know. And stories, I read Stephen King's on writing, and he said, like, the story's there, but you work at it, it's like almost like you're uncovering the story, it already exists. I know it sounds really weird, but it is. I find that once you get started, I find I get a lot of characters and throw them into a situation and see what happens. And the weird thing is they start acting for themselves. I sound like a schizophrenic here.
Maybe you're more of a skald, more of a bard than you recognise, because you're taking a story that exists, but you are putting your own interpretation on it. You're breathing life into it. You're letting us see the life in it. So maybe you are more of a skald than you think.
Maybe that's, or just a paperback writer.
Well, maybe that too. But hey, listen, don't play yourself down. Plenty of people have. What I loved about the whole series, the Whale Road series, is I've always been a fan of Vikings, and I was actually involved for my sins in the first invasion of Strangford Lough in this century. That's another story for another day. But fabulous stuff, and I mean those Viking ships were absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah, they're equivalent of an F-16 fighter jet today, you know, technology-wise. But if you could imagine, like, a farmer getting one and deciding I'm gonna go overseas and see where it gets me, and they could go up rivers. They could go. There's Oxford Island in Loch Ness. There's a Viking camp there. It's like, how did they get there?
Yeah, quite so. The in the Whale Road series, apart from the Irish Princess of Frigga, who's a dead shot with a bow and a very, very frightening woman, there's also a group of really frightening men that Einar gets adopted by.
Yes.
The Wolfcoats.
Yeah.
Is that factual?
They were elite in that they worked for kings only, but they were professional warriors that just did that. At a time whenever, you know, you had to do your farm, you had to do your thing. So yes, there's not a lot known about them. They're mentioned in 3 or 4 different poems from about 800 AD, but those particular people aren't. Those are fictional characters, but they're the Wolfcoat. What would you call it? Clan or the type of Viking is a historical thing. Yes.
And to be a Wolfcoat, you had to be very, very special, and you aspired to become a Wolfcoat.
Yes.
Yeah.
You would. It was like the best of the best. If you were. You could be a warrior, then you could be a berserker, but then if you were really good, you became an Oathbringer.
When you started writing, when you wrote the first in the Viking series, did you think it was going to be a one-off,
yes,
a trilogy, or as it now turns out, it looks like it's going to be a triple trilogy?
9 is the number which is sacred to Odin, which just seems to have turned out that way. Sound like a complete weirdo now. But I actually wrote, I remember I was on a plane actually, when I wrote the first scene from Odin's game, and it was actually the bit where in Strangford Lough, where Einar's sitting on the beach waiting to get his throat slit.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be much later in the book, as it turned out. But it was always only one book, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Uh-huh.
But whenever the publisher came back and said they wanted 3 to 5, I realised I couldn't end it.
Yeah.
So I had to chop the ending off, which then became the ending of book 3 possibly, or 4.
Yeah, yeah.
And then somehow fill in a bit in the middle and add some something to keep everyone going after each book.
I'm one of these irritating readers that I virtually skim through the first read, dying to get to the end to find out what happens. And then I'm devastated when it ends, which is why the idea of a series of 9 has me really excited. Tim, your books are packed with historical detail. They're hair-raising battles, authentic sounding descriptions, gripping plots. But what's next for Einar, Afrika, and the Wolfcoats?
Well, at the last book, Blood Eagle, they split up.
Yeah.
Einar he's always been a bit of a dreamer, I guess. And he kind of got sickened with the just chaotic violence that's the other thing, that in Norse literature there is like these words, poetry of Odin, and one of his sayings is, peace I never bring. He just goes around the world stirring up problems and trouble. And Einar's kind of seduced by the vision of Athelstan, who's like this English king who's like trying to almost rebuild the Roman Empire. He's bringing in civilization. He's trying to civilize the world, and Einar kind of gets sucked into that. And he breaks from the Wolfcoats, who go to Ireland, because there's Olaf the Red. Afrika's brother has some plans. But if anybody is familiar with that period of history, the next book that's coming out in the series, which I'm writing at the moment, is set in 937, and that's when Olaf the Red invaded Britain with Constantine of Scotland.
Wow.
And they ended up fighting a battle called the Battle of Brunanburg against Athelstan. So Einar's on one side, his old mates are on the other. And
fascinating idea. I never knew that that any part of Ireland tried to invade England. I think that's fabulous. It's wonderful.
They nearly succeeded if they had won that battle.
Yeah. Well, so many people did nearly succeed, but they just didn't get there in the end. But and let's not do any more spoiler on the book, because that's not.
I haven't
not
finished
right.
it, so I don't know what happens.
Except you're now plotting. So and so we've wondered what's happening to Einar, what's happening to Afrika, what's happening to the Wolfcoats. What's happening to Tim Hodkinson? What next for you?
Well, as I said, I've got there's a book coming out in April called Sword of the War God, which is set at the time of Attila the Hun.
Oh wow!
I'm finishing the new Wolfcoat book, and apart from that, I've got a daughter doing her A levels, and another one who's in lower sixth, and just family life really.
How do you fit it all in?
Get up early. I mean, so it's the one thing I've had to do is a lot of reading and research around Old Norse, and there's this poem called the Havamal, and it's supposedly the words of Odin, but it's all like advice that your granny would give you. And one of them is get up early. If you want to get stuff done, get up early. And it is true. I get up before everyone else, and disciplined, right, for at least an hour to 2 hours, and then everyone gets up and the day starts.
Tim Hodkinson, it's been an absolute delight to meet you, author and father extraordinaire. It's an absolute joy to read your books. I'm looking forward to more over the years. Please keep writing them.
Well, thanks very much. There's no need to be. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
No, you think I've flattered you there? I haven't. I genuinely mean that, because I've really enjoyed reading the books. So please keep writing them.
I'm genuinely pleased to hear that, because the reason you write stories is because you want people to read and enjoy them. And every time I meet somebody else, it's great. Thank you very much.